Mr. Baig had his education in Broome School, and after that he did his masters in history from St. Stephen's. Then later on he worked in the advertising agencies and PR consultancy. Then he authored a book on 80 questions on understanding India. After that he has been writing very elaborately on history, mythology and religion of the country. Welcome, Mr. Baig. In conversation will be Mr. G.S. Cheema. He is a former bureaucrat and a very prolific writer. He has also written 3 books: The Forgotten Mughals, Our History, Their History, which talks about India and European cultures. And then he has translated another book on Mughal Empire, which is Memoirs of the Mughal Empire. So welcome you, Mr. Cheema. So both of you in conversation and discussing it. So please start.
It's a great pleasure to be here. And when you talk about culture, it's important to remember what an important influence the Mughal culture had on the culture of Punjab also. Now, not everybody knows, but a lot of people still remember that when Dara Shikoh was defeated after Samughal, he was defeated on the brink of victory by betrayal. When he was defeated, he fled to Delhi and then went to Lahore. And the 7th Guru was the one who gave him shelter, took him across the Satluj and hid all the boats so that Aurangzeb couldn't take the boats to cross and chase him. So therefore there's a lot of link. But the point is that 300 years of Mughal history has made a deep imprint in the DNA of every Indian. And I don't mean it in the sense of blood, but in the sense of our culture. And the culture, as was discussed yesterday, is something that we don't understand how important it is. When the Spanish destroyed the culture of the Central American countries of Mexico and Southern America and all the rest of it, the people suddenly didn't know who they were. They lost their language, they lost their sense of identity, they lost everything. When the Russians expanded into what's present-day Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan and all these areas of the Islamic states of southern Russia, they put a Russian culture, they destroyed all vestiges of the religion and everything, and therefore the people today are rootless. They don't know who they are, they don't know who they belong to, they don't know their language, they have no pride in the heritage. And I think we're all very happy that most people in India have an extremely good pride in their heritage, wherever they come from. And it's not only, we are not a homogeneous country, we are still a land of maybe 1,000 different islands of language, culture, religion, and all sorts of things. Now, I had to do a lot of research on this book because a lot of work on Dara was not known. Dara is like a sort of vague Hamlet-like figure in Mughal history. He's a footnote in the history of Shah Jahan. He's a footnote in the history of Aurangzeb. And basically, we know that he was a nice guy, but that nice guys come last. And he was not a person who was terribly successful as a soldier, although actually his basic trouble was he was too trusting. He had too many interests, but you'll be surprised to know that he was responsible for the first translations of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishad, 59 of the Upanishads, into Persian and then into India. Remember, in the time of Shah Jahan, Hindustan was a Muslim, was a Mughal country. And therefore, as a Mughal country, it was a Muslim country because the word Hindu did not mean religion. There were dozens of different forms of Hindu worship, and the word Hindu basically meant farmers and artisans and so on. So therefore, the Hindu ethos and the Hindu culture had vanished over the period of the Turks in the Sultanate and the Mughal period. And therefore, when Dara rediscovered the wealth of some of the Sanskrit thing and brought it into mainstream, he did a huge service to India.
Very nice. Just a moment, before you get into the contents of it, I would like to ask about the structure of the book, which you have done in a very running style. It is not written in a traditional academic manner. And you have said I. Now who is this I through which you have sought to describe the entire?
Ajay, very good question. You see, I've read a lot of history, and the trouble is that, like most children from school and college, history has oftentimes been badly taught and is boring. Now, therefore, what I try to do is to try and tell history as it was happening. I.e., this book is actually 80% accurate history. 20% are the purely fictitious adventures of a narrator called Mubarak Ali, who is a young eunuch, and he had to be a eunuch to be in the Zanana. And he had to be in the Zanana because he had to grow up with the princes and princesses. He had to grow up with Jahanara and Dara and Aurangzeb and Shuja and Murad and Roshanara. So therefore, as they grow up, you see, you have to remember that a lot of the problems in later life take place because of memories of childhood which people don't forget. The humiliations of childhood and so on. Today, when there are corporate battles, people forget that the battles go back to an enmity that took place in their childhood very often. So therefore, he was part of their childhood, and but his own adventures tell a portrait of India as it was at that time. And then he fought for Aurangzeb in some of his battles, and then eventually allied with Dara because he had more identity with Dara's intellectual, because Dara was a poet and a philosopher, and a painter, and a man of many talents. So therefore, what I'm inviting you to do was to share a part of the actual feeling of history and seeing it through the eyes of somebody who is actually witness to history.
And it is most of us nowadays are unfamiliar with the institution of eunuchs. And eunuchs and slaves, although Mubarak Ali was technically a slave, yet he was a person of great importance and cannot be confounded with modern day slavery or even the European slavery. And many of the eunuchs of that period rose to very high office under the Mughals and earlier also under the Sultans. Could you tell us a little bit more about?
Yes. You see, as far as Islam is concerned, all people are equal before Allah. And that applied to a slave, it applied to a prince. So a prince, a slave, and a beggar would go on the Friday prayer and would embrace each other as brothers. So therefore, there was no intrinsic inequality between a prince and a slave. And therefore, many slaves who rose to power, like Malik, Ambar, and so on, became very powerful commanders of the Deccan forces and so on. Malik Kafur in this period was a very successful general in the army of Iltutmish, I think. Therefore, the slaves, there was no limit to where they could. During the Sultanate period, there was a period of where the slave kings, where the Mamluks, all the way from Egypt, Turkey to India, were slave kings. They were a brotherhood of soldiers who only believed in a military alliance, and they all rose something. Their wives are only for procreation. But the slaves were very often the ones who rose to power, to position of importance, were people of enormous importance. But not only slave, I must also mention that the one thing that I've also emphasized in this is the importance of women. people forget that women were very, very important in the Mughal Empire. And this goes back to the time of Genghis Khan. When Genghis Khan said men are not fit to rule an empire. They're so busy fighting wars and going exploring new territories, they don't have time to rule a kingdom. So therefore, it's the women who must rule. Of course, we will sign the farmans, but the actual day-to-day administration, and even in the Mughal period, the power of the women behind the parda was very considerable. Many of the empresses had the royal seal, and the farmans would only go out after they put that tappa on it.
Another of your sources is Manuji, the author of Story of the Mughals. It's a very fascinating book, this 3-volume, written by this Venetian who came to India in the late 17th century, Manuji.
Manuji, correct. Manuji, see, many of the Bernier, Manuji, and many of the others who were there have written some very nice work, but these were written for European audiences. And see, one of the big weaknesses of the sources was the fact that the women were very closely cloistered, and therefore what was happening actually in the court, very few people knew. And most of our records were based on Persian flatterers. The official record keeping was done by the official scribes, and they would only write what their patrons, the kings and others wanted to write, and therefore they chose not to write about some of the defeated princes. There's a wonderful book I'm working on now on the life of Shuja after his defeat. There's an enormous history which is not known, and I've had to do a lot of research to try and find that out. But you see, the research has oftentimes been quite easy. You see, when you're doing a fictional thing, you can take a few liberties. But at the same time, what I found was that, for example, there was absolutely no record, and here in a martial state like Punjab, you'd be surprised to know that India's military history begins with the British. The British had such contempt for the native armies that there's no record in terms of how the armies were fought, what the structures were, the command structure. Nothing was written. Even their weapons and so on were trophies on their walls, but they did not have any. They didn't have anything in terms of the science of their weapons. I had to go to the military museum of Istanbul, which I recommend to all of you if you ever go to Istanbul. That it's an incredibly good history which tells the military history of the Turks from the time of the Huns in the 6th century AD. So therefore, remember, the Mughals got that military technology from the Persians, Persians got it from the Turks. So therefore, Turkey tells you a lot about Mughal history also. The other thing was that I've been fortunate that in my working career, I was 18 years as the head of marketing in a company that sold tractors and motorcycles. So I've been to every district of India, so I know the land. And I've personally visited the battlefields of Sangrur and Deorai and so on, because these were, unless you actually see the battlefields, you can't see how the armies move. You can't see how the various battalions were made to move on the battlefield. And therefore, when I write, I also can tell you a lot about the geography of India, because the spread of the story goes all the way from the first battle near Ajmer, near Ujjain, to Sangrur outside Agra, to Varanasi and Allahabad, the two battles against Shah Shuja, and the final battle of Deorai. After Dara went all the way to Lahore, down the Indus, and then finally came to Deorai, which is near Ajmer. So it's a tremendous geographical thing, and to discuss that is entirely different if you're just discussing it generally, and another if you know the color of the soil, and you know the trees that grow there, you know the animals that live there. So these are some of the things which I think have enriched this, and a lot of people have been liked the fact that this is in that way a little more authentic than some of the others.
Tragedy of Shukr, well, he was a very interesting and a type of figure, as you said. But he is uncharacteristic of his other cousins and the descendants of the later Mughals. Because even later on in the 18th century, when you come across when the civil wars broke out after the death of Aurangzeb, all the princes came out and fought. And they fought bravely, and many of them died on the field. But Dara Shikoh, after his first defeat, as Waldemar Hansen, another person who you have used, Dara never stopped running. He just kept running from one place to another, always shying off a battle, and finally retreating into the wilds of Balochistan. Well, he is more of an anti-hero when we talk in that sense.
As I said, he's a little like Hamlet. But the point was that he was also a philosopher. Now, when I mentioned that he learned Sanskrit, please understand that he learned Sanskrit because the whole culture of the Mughal Empire at that time was a Ganga Jamuna mixing of Hindu, Muslim, Sunni, Shia, which stopped and dried up when Aurangzeb came in. Aurangzeb spent his last 29 years of his life fighting not only the Marathas, but fighting the Shia sultanates of Berar, Golconda and Bijapur. Because for him, Shia was a worse thing than to be a Hindu. And I've tried very hard not to be unfair to Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb had very many admirable qualities, but he was absolutely a rigid Sunni Muslim. And that, unfortunately, was one of the important sorrows of India's history.
I'm glad you tried to do some justice to Aurangzeb, because he is a person who is much maligned. And when in Punjab for our reason, we have various grievances and he's painted as black as possible. But there were many plus points about him. And if you compare him with his father Shah Jahan, I think he was no worse than him. Because Shah Jahan, when he ascended the throne, he also cleaned out the entire palace, all his brothers, all his cousins, they were all killed. I think there were 7 or 8 of them. And another one, was a little child also. Whereas Aurangzeb killed only, I think, 2 people.
Aurangzeb, surprisingly, you'll be surprised to know that while he's been considered to be a Hindu hater, 36 Hindu temples have been endowed by Aurangzeb, including Chitrakoot, including Gilnar, including Guwahati. 36 temples have their revenues to this day based on the revenues from 5, 6, 10 surrounding villages under the Farman of Aurangzeb. But he did sanction the destruction of Kashi Vishwanath, destruction, as well as Mathura and one in Orcha. But these were political punishments for the rulers of that area, and it was not an act of religion. It was an act of state policy. It was politics and not religion. But again, and he had there several farmans on record that he had said that no old temple must be disturbed, no Brahmin must be disturbed. He did not allow new temples to be built, but he would not allow old ones to be destroyed. So therefore, there's a lot that has to be said. But in his philosophy, there's also quite a lot that I need to do. And if I may, I'd like to read just a few passages from his trial. So when he was finally brought before Aurangzeb, Aurangzeb, of course, was too smart. He didn't want any blood to be on his own hands. So he handed Dara over to the Muslim Qazis for them to have him tried for the crime of heresy. Now I have to tell you that heresy, which carries the death sentence according to the Sharia, is not a crime that is mentioned in the Quran. It's a Jewish punishment. Heresy and blasphemy to insult a god is a Jewish crime. It's only in the 10th century, 300 years after the Prophet, that the Jewish Torah became one of the sacred books of Islam, and the mullahs were only too happy to adopt some of the terrible punishments which were prescribed in the 613 commandments. There were not 10 commandments. if you read the book of Leviticus in a copy of the Bible, you will get sick. Death sentences by stoning, drowning, strangulation, burning, for 11 different types of adultery, for assorted other crimes which I won't bore you with, in what you eat, don't eat, not being circumcised, all sorts of quite ridiculous thing. So therefore heresy became an Islamic punishment long after the Prophet. So it's not intrinsically Islamic, but it is very much part of Islam today, as the Taliban keeps reminding us. But therefore, when the Qazis were interviewing Dara, so the first Qazi asked Dara to hand him a jade ring that was on his left hand. He turned it over and the Qazi looked at it and said, this green stone is inscribed with the word of Allah on one side and Prabhu on the other. Does this mean that you consider the Hindu God to be equal to the Muslim Allah? Dara raised his head slowly and answered, Honorable clerics, the cosmic creator is known by many names. He is recognized as God, Allah, Prabhu, Jehovah, Ahura Mazda, and many other names by devoted people all over the world. So he said, you're saying that Allah and Prabhu are the same? He said, yes, I believe so. I believe that Allah is the God of all people who simply call him by different names. But there's only one cosmic creator, even if people have different places of worship and revere him in many different ways. So therefore, he said that even in the sacred text, he goes and mentions that you will surely recall that even in our own scriptures that the merciful Allah sent down 124,000 messengers to show all the people of the world the way to righteousness. I believe that Allah's messengers carrying his messengers have been sent not only to Muslims, but to all the people of the world in every age. And I believe that all people have a pious duty to seek these messengers that have become obscured by the confusion of languages and the ignorant interpretations of narrow-minded priests. So therefore, he had a very, very eclectic, open mind as far as he was concerned. There was no Hindu and Muslim. They were all God's creatures. And so, as I say, this was one of the, but he then wrote his own book. His own book was called The Mingling of the Oceans, where he showed, and it's quite a remarkable book, you can download it from Google, called, and it says that he's showing the common links between the Quran and the Hindu scripture. It's a surprisingly erudite book. So on that he was condemned for heresy and was duly executed. Aurangzeb only signed the order. He didn't put his hand to any violence, but the assassins came out the next day and cut off his head.
Very interesting, Dr. I think we need to revisit and reassess the incidentally, why have you named your book Ocean of Cobra?
Very good question. I've been asked by a lot of people, and some people said they didn't pick up the book because they were scared of the cobra. You see, the Mughals, like all the Rajput princes, were very superstitious. Indian army suffered so many defeats because they wouldn't move until the Brahmins told them of an auspicious time which was right to go or not to go. The Marathas lost the third battle of Panipat because the Rajputsi told them that the time was auspicious and they should not attack. So by the time they chose to attack in early January, their horses and men were so starved that they were able to fight with any kind of thing. So astrologers had a very important part. So anyway, according to Manucci, but it's corroborated by some other sources, one day he sent an urgent messenger to the court of Shah Jahan saying, Pasha, an extraordinary thing happened yesterday. Lakhs and lakhs of cobras came out of the forest to the east, and they went all day like a river to the west. Everybody hid themselves in their homes, planted trees. No harm came to anybody. But this was such an extraordinary thing. It's never happened before. It must mean something. It must have a significance. So Shah Jahan called his astrologers and soothsayers, both Hindu and Muslim, and they started discussing it. So the Muslims said, oh, this is a very bad omen. And the Hindus said, no, no, it's not a bad omen, because we Hindus think that the snakes are the keepers of treasures and the jewels. So therefore it may mean that there's a lot of wealth going to come into the country. So they argued a bit. Now, in this account, it said that at the head of the ocean of cobras, there was a very large serpent, which on his raised head had a small white snake. So when this was told to Shah Jahan, he suddenly paled, because he knew something that nobody else did. And he said, enough, I've had enough. I'm tired, I'm going to rest, you all go away. Because what he knew, what nobody else did, was that when he was a rebel prince, running away from his very, very cruel father, Jahangir, he was in, I believe, somewhere near Bijapur. Mumtaz, who was again pregnant, she had 14 pregnancies in 19 years of marriage. And amazingly, she was such an incredibly wonderful wife that Shah Jahan had 3 wives before Anjuman Banu Mumtaz, and lots of concubines after she died, some time after she died. During the 19 years of marriage, he never looked at another woman. So anyway, she was pregnant. So when she suddenly had a craving for apples, now where the deccan can you find apples? So anyway, Prince Kurum went out, asked apples, you know where I can find some apples, you know where? So he suddenly, almost by a miracle, came across a fakir who had 2 red apples in his hand. So he said to him, he said, Hazur, take these apples and smell them carefully. Because when you're in danger, if you can smell the apple from your hand, no harm will come to you. But if the smell goes from your hand, then you are in great danger from your 3rd son, who has the pale white skin of camphor and the cold black eyes of a cobra. So therefore, he always distrusted Aurangzeb from childhood. And therefore, he used to sometimes call him a white snake, and Jahanara scolded him. He said that's very unkind to call him something so insulting. But he never trusted Aurangzeb. And this is one of the reasons that Aurangzeb was always sent out of the court. Aurangzeb and Dara were always fighting. They were always quarreling. Right. So therefore, the white snake was part of that ocean of cobras that Manucci had written about in which is a matter of historic record.
What's the relevance of this?
To be very frank, we always look for a catchy title and something to get people curious.
Both of you have done deep research. Can you just specify what impact did Mughals leave on things? Just briefly.
Well, the Mughal impact on India was, well, it created modern India, I would say. The British came, they ruled for more than 200 years, in fact, 300 years. They ruled for more than 1826, right to 1857, technically speaking. So it's a period of more than 300 years. Whereas the British Raj, of which we think made a tremendous impact, that lasted in Punjab less than 100 years. It was only 98 years in Punjab. Whereas the rest of India, you can at best stretch it to 150 years. Largely by a very, well, flight of imagination, counted as 200 years. And the impact on education was very slight, as in a recent book published by this Mr. Shashi Tharoor he makes it quite plain, points out how little the British did for educating India, how little they cared about India, whereas the Mughals lived in India, they died in India, they worked in India. The British just came here like expatriate workers, earned their pension and went back with their treasures. They did very little, and whatever happened was basically inadvertent, one of those unexpected and unsought for.
The Mughals had a vision of a whole India. Hindustan was very much a kind of a great Mughal empire, and it's only people of great arrogance like the British and the Mughals who dreamed. Even Shivaji and his successors, the Peshwa Marathas, never dreamt of anything more than a Maratha empire. They never dreamt of an all India empire. But remember, the British only ruled half of India. The other half was still under the Maharaja of Patiala, the Maharaja of Gwalior, the Maharaja of Hyderabad, the Nizam of Hyderabad, and the other 560 Maharajas. They were allowed to substantially rule with little disturbance, although British agents were in their courts. They put a national railway, and which was probably the most uniting single thing. But they made no attempt either on education or on the health. They were not interested in rural India at all. Whereas the Mughal administration, the Qazis were, even to this day, many Hindus take their disputes to the local Qazi rather than to the courts of law, because they will get justice that day, according to your law. So therefore, the impacts were, but the cultural impact, a Punjabi wedding and a Mughal wedding are exactly the same.
Another thing on the political side, the most fallacious claim advanced on behalf of the British is that they unified India. It is totally absurd. The Mughals, on the other hand, they lasted much longer, and at their height, they embraced the whole of India, including the province of Kabul and at times Punjab. Whereas the British, as Mr. Baig has pointed out, and various others, ruled only a limited portion of it, and the rest was entirely an indirect rule.
So, Murad, what is the next book that you're working on?
I've just submitted a manuscript for a monumental effort called The Hijacking of God, or a very substantial work I've been doing for the last 10 years on how the idea of God evolved in every religion and how it got hijacked by its own priest. And I've just done the first cut of a book on the life of Shah Shuja, who, if you go to Bundelkhand, they'll believe that he did not die in the Arakan as historic sources believe, but he survived and came back and discovered the diamonds of Panna, and also became a religious leader who then took on the mantle of Prannath, who has 5 or 10 million devotees in India to this day, and showing a remarkable synthesis of both Islamic and Hindu thinking.
Very illuminating thought. May I now open the session to the audience? If you have any questions, please. Come on.
So like the Gurchandas book, Difficulty of Being Good, and similarly we see in Dara Shikoh as well. So the difficulty of being good, and you have written on the both sides and seen both the characters, or even you can see characterization of the two types of sorts. So one aspect is how do you see the difficulty of being good, and the second aspect is that some of the times the prophecies, they become true because we make them true. So the way you have said that Shah Jahan always despised and had a feeling that Aurangzeb would turn out to be, and finally he turned out like that. Because you make things happen the difficulty of being good and how prophecies, you make them through yourself. Thank you.
The difficulty of being good is mostly about the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata a mythological epic, the largest epic in the world, has very clearly definition between good and bad. Whereas I have tried very hard to avoid going into good cop, bad cop, of saying that who's a good guy and bad guy. As far as I'm concerned, neither Aurangzeb nor Dara are good or bad. Both of them have character failings. Both of them have remarkable qualities. And therefore, I've tried to be fair to both things. Because I don't want you to think that I'm biased, I'm anti-Aurangzeb or I'm pro-Dara. Yes, I think there's a lot to admire in Dara. But if the question that I've been often asked is if Dara had won the battle of Sangrur as he nearly did, would India's history be different? I'm sure it would have been. I think that Ganga, Jamuna spirit of Hindu, Muslim, amity would have probably survived much longer. That Qatar Sunni Islamic view, which came in with Aurangzeb, really weakened India because the Mughal Empire did not last 350 years. The Mughal Empire actually finished with Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb, by the time he was 91 years old, he finished. The empire was gone. His last letter is pathetic. The empire was gone. It staggered on for 150 years because nobody wanted to say that I would take on the empire. But Delhi was looted time and again, Nadir Shah was not the only one. So therefore, it's a very, very tortuous tale, but a very important part of India's history that we should know.
I'll ask you a small question. Murad, it's on the lighter side. It's not, you can relax and smile because it's not one of those tricky questions. You mentioned about 500 other states which were part of. You unfortunately missed out the royal state of Jind. You did mention the royal state of Patiala and the royal states of Hyderabad, but you missed out this.
maybe it didn't have a 21-gun salute.
Yeah, maybe you're right. All the best. Thank you.
Actually, one thing. There are copies of the book available. I brought some copies which are. If anyone wants to buy a copy, I'll be sitting there willing to sign them for you. The cost of the book is $325, but the author's price is $200. So anyone wants to pay $200 can leave $200 and take a book.
I have a quick question. Can I ask a question?
Well, that's a major question.
Mr. Baig, I have a quick question. William Dalrymple, when questioned whether he'd like to write a book on Aurangzeb, and that's a misconstrued character, painted in black and white, as you rightly mentioned yourself, he said, somebody has to do it, but, I don't think I suppose I can't live with him for 5 years. What is your take?
Sorry?
So you can't spend time with Aurangzeb and researching Aurangzeb for a long time, as in for 5 years, because that's the time that's required. Do you feel that it's high time that somebody did justice to that character too?
Well, I have a lot of admiration for Willie Dalrymple, and if he says something, I'm sure it's true, but I don't understand the five-year question.
Researching the character,
It takes a lot of research. I mean, it took me 6 years of research to do this book.
do you think it's fair enough to say that?
See, there's no rule. I did an earlier book, 80 Questions to Understand India. This book was actually work that started from my time in college. So there's 30 years of intermittent work that's gone into it.
Thank you very much.